All right, I want to share with you a couple examples of the power of audits. And the first one sounds kind of obvious, but it really comes down to doing the audit when you're supposed to do the audit. And so, for example, if you have it set up where you've assigned a component to someone, they know how they're supposed to do it, they know what their critical driver is, you know what your KPI is that's supposed to be hit, and that's reported up to you, and you let it sit in your Slack channel or your text message or email, whatever method of delivery you have, if you let it sit there and mature for a long period of time before you even check it, that is pointless. That actually doesn't do you any good. The entire purpose of the audit is to audit it as soon as it's sent to you so that you can take the next step, objective decision making, and make those changes as live. For example, I shared a Marco Polo example where I had all of the technicians every morning basically with their phone show me them in uniform and tell me what their goals were for the day. And I remember a time where I don't know what was going on in my life, but I remember letting those Marco Polos from all of the technicians build up for like 2 weeks at a time. And I had dozens of Marco Polos that I hadn't even watched. And it got to the point where they stopped even doing the audit or stopped doing this daily thing because they knew I wasn't watching it. And I eventually went through it. And from like 2 weeks ago, I saw an issue of like how someone was dressed. And then I saw it get progressively worse over a 2-week period. And by the time that it came for me to like even address it 2 weeks later, I can't really go back to that employee and say, 2 weeks ago, you were wearing your uniform incorrectly. The power is gone if you let that happen. So first thing, and this is like critically important, if you say that something needs to be reported up to you, you need to audit it at the time of that report being sent up to you. If you don't, then you're going to lose a ton of respect, and the power behind the whole reason for the report and for the audit will disappear. In fact, it can backfire on you. I don't have an example of it backfiring like off the top of my head, but I can think of dozens of times in my business history where I've let things go too long that by the time I get around to auditing it, it's backfired. Like it does more harm than it does good. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I want to share a story. When I was recruited to I was recruited to fly my family down to Arizona for 1 month with the intent of auditing a call center for a large corporate pest control company and basically build a report of everything that I saw that was going wrong in the call center and what I would do to fix it. And this obviously is my jam, right? This is what I love doing. This was before I do what I do now. And but I took it super serious, so I was excited to do it. And there was a lot on that report. Ultimately, I walked away from that experience a little bit disheartened because I built this huge report of all of these things that they could do. And I actually itemized it and said, here's a huge list of things, but if you just do these 5 things, like this is going to increase your business by a ton in the call center part of your business. And the business ended up just not taking it very seriously, not implementing any change. And it led to a lot of the same issues that they wanted me to help solve. And so that was a little disheartening. And I think we all experience that in life where it's not enough just to know how to fix something. It requires some synergy from both parties to work together to actually implement those changes. And implementation is challenging. It's hard. I get it. You watching this, it's really easy to watch these videos, but going through the steps and actually implementing all these things into your business is a challenge. And it's a lot easier for me to sit here and tell you, hey, this is what you do and this is how you do it, than you actually going out and implementing it. But by making it this far, I do applaud you. Like if you are implementing all these steps, your business is in a good spot. Anyway, back to the story. When I was down there, one of the things that I remember distinctly is they had like super clear KPIs and they had really, really good ways to capture the data. And they had a really good reporting up structure. And the reporting up was done all with systems, right? So the employee didn't necessarily have to report up. the system did it for them. So there's a disconnect there. A lot of times the employees didn't know whether they were even hitting their goal at the end of the day, because they weren't the ones reporting up. It was a system that was diving in and pulling the report and sending it up to the manager. So that was one thing I saw. But one of the, basically for a call representative for this company, there are two KPIs. The first KPI was, or sorry, not KPI, critical drivers. There are two critical drivers that they were responsible for every single day. And their performance was based on whether or not they did these critical drivers well. And they were, first, call time. It was to have a certain percentage of time clocked on the phone. They're a call center representative. They're responsible to actually be on the phone and not doing notes or talking to friends or working with management, et cetera. The second thing was they were required to make a certain number of calls every single day. And in my head, I went into it thinking, wow, these are really, really strong, good critical drivers. It makes sense that a good call center representative is going to make a lot of calls and they're going to have a lot of phone time. And but what I saw, and when I first went in, I went in kind of undercover boss style. I went in like as a trainee, and I was taught probably on day 3 all of the loopholes. They said, hey, here's your critical driver, but here's your loophole of how you go about doing it. And this company, they had categories of queues, which essentially was, for example, they had like a cancellation queue where you could basically log in to a database and pull all of the people that had requested cancellation to call them and help them overcome their cancellation or help them cancel their account. They had a rescheduling queue. They had a accounts receivable queue, meaning their credit card or billing method went bad and we were just going to collect their billing. They had a bunch of different queues. And they said, I was taught this. Okay, the way that you manipulate the critical driver is you go in and you make as many calls as you possibly can on the accounts receivable queue, because those are fast. It's easy to update the billing. Most of them go to voicemail. It's super fast voicemail, and you can churn through tons and tons of calls in a day, and your numbers are going to look great. And you do that all day long, and it's easy. You don't have to worry about people yelling at you, trying to cancel. And if they do try to cancel, you just say, hey, I'm not the cancellation department. Let me put you in the cancellation queue, and they move in to be someone else's problem. And then what you do is you elect to be in the sales queue, because the sales queue, they take a long time, right? It's not a 1-minute conversation. Those sales sometimes take 5 to 15 minutes to solidify a sale. And that lengthens the time of the call, and it gives you a lot of phone time every single day. And they said, if you just do those two things, and in my head, I'm thinking, well, who's taking these cancel calls, you know? And as I dug in, I realized that these cancel calls weren't being dealt with, and they were getting a lot of negative feedback internally. They weren't meeting their KPIs. And so what I saw, though, is that the management, it was such a big corporation, the management didn't really have anyone or any system. It was all systems. They didn't have anyone set up to be the liaison between them and the employees that were hitting these critical drivers. But it was an issue because their critical drivers looked really, really strong, but the KPIs weren't being met. And so me going in, being able to be eyeballs on site and seeing how these calls were made and how these hoops were able to be jumped through to have really, really good critical driver metrics, but failing in the KPIs was extremely important. So hopefully that expresses to you the value of not just having number audits, but actually going in and testing the SOP. Now that I was able to see that the critical drivers weren't valuable, I realized, hey, we need another critical driver. We need to have a critical driver that's ratio of all of these queues. You know, you can't have 90% of the calls done in a day just on accounts receivable. We need to spread that out. What does a fair ratio look like amongst all of these categories? And that was part of my report. I never got listened to because employees were happy, like getting really, really good critical drivers. So KPIs for that company continue to suffer, even though critical drivers were really high. But anyway, it didn't get fixed. So it didn't have a happy ending for this company, but hopefully it shows you the power of not just doing invisible audits, but also doing active audits and how they work synergistically together. Now I'm going to go in and actually talk about how do we set up an SOP for your audit so that you can either do it yourself in as little time as most effective way possible, and how do you get it to a point where you can hand it off and assign it just like any other component.